Hi, everyone. I'm putting out this video to clarify a couple of things from the other video I did where I showed a different way to solve the poem that ends up at the wheel, but it doesn't actually use try to wheel. And I realized after I did it that I didn't really explain it and actually go through it. So I wanted to do that relatively quickly now. But before I do it, I want to say that the way this came about is when Sam approached me again at the end of 2019 and early in 2020, he showed me the stuff that he's been doing for the past 2 years, and he had some updates. And then I pointed out to him that I did some searching in it too, and I found out that there's a way to come up to the same solution, but a little bit differently, and it doesn't rely on the fact that you went through the process of uncovering the secret in the poem, right? So you don't need to know it. You still need to know about the wheel, obviously, because it's a physical place and it's where one of the clues are. But you don't have to mess around with the poem. And the reason why I showed this to him is I just wanted to kind of give him another approach because I think that he was getting too stuck on Porcupine Falls. What I'm going to show you would be like, let's say, a complete solve, but keep in mind that the very ending I didn't discuss with Sam because I didn't have that figured out by May of 2020. That was why when I showed Forrest Fenn where we were going, I mentioned Five Springs, but I told him that was not going to be until late June 2020 or early July. We wanted to take Sam's locations out of the equation first, but that would give me time to try to finish Five Springs. So the last few steps of this are not, I never told the Sam until after the fact. So although this is going to look like a complete solve, it wasn't. It up to about halfway was about where it was solved, and I ended up at the wheel. But after the fact, then I figured it out more. So anyway, here goes, and I'm not going to explain everything deeply, but like I talked about in the other video with 1943, and then that was when he first became of his awareness and jump starting the learning curve, so on and so forth. But if it wasn't for the first 10 years, which brings us to 1953, when a lot of events took place. For example, here's a couple of things about 1953. Some of them have something to do with it, I believe. Some of them don't. Well, 1953 is 7:53 p.m. That's military time, right? So when you're reading the book, when he says just before 8, after my district attorney and so on and so forth, I believe that those were references to the tail end of the show. And it was just hinting at just before 8 p.m. And incidentally, if you look at the wheel, 8 p.m. would roughly be where the E Cairn is going down. So 8 p.m. would basically be that vector. But other things that happened in 1953, Joseph Henry Sharp died in 1953. As you know, Forrest Fenn and Peggy got married in 1953. Forrest Fenn became a U.S. Air Force pilot in 1953. Forrest Fenn learned how to fly the T-6, which is, he said, it was the most difficult plane to fly in 1953. Charles Carl C.K. Simpson, Forrest Fenn mother's father, so his grandfather on his mother's side, died 1953. Mr. District Attorney was over at 8 p.m. that I already talked about. Also, the radio show itself ended syndication in 1953. Amos and Andy was sponsored by Blatt's Beer, and I want to mention this here too. When they're talking about here from 51 to 53, I believe they're talking about the television version. The recent video I did, that's from 1947, and that was a radio show. So I believe the Amos and Andy show ran from like 1928 until 1953, and it wasn't until the last couple of years that it was on television. But I believe that the reference really didn't have anything to do with that. I believe it had to do with Campbell's soup, and it goes back to the canned goods stuff where he's talking about the can opener and how Mrs. Ford's face looked like a can opener. Like I described, that was when Good Housekeeping came out with a special cooking book where they discussed nothing but canned foods because this was during ration time. So that's what I believe the hint really was. So none of that really matters. And incidentally, and I don't think this matters either, but Amos and Andy was the first comedy sitcom that had a totally African American cast. The other thing that happened, and this is interesting, in 1953, Congress passed laws to abolish certain tribes and relocate American Indians. It was called the Resolution 108 and Public Law 280. The termination of these tribes ended federal government guardianship of and recognition of these tribal governments and U.S. jurisdiction of tribal lands. In addition to ending tribal rights as sovereign nations, the policy terminated all federal support for most healthcare and education programs, utility service, police, and fire departments available to Indians on all reservations. This resolution was eventually abandoned in 1988. In 1968, they tried to abandon it, but it didn't go through until 1988. So that was a pretty major thing, okay, where they were relocating, basically telling, the a lot of reservations that if they didn't agree to certain stipulations, that you were basically just removed from all support. And they were forced to get off the reservation and come out and live as normal citizens, essentially. So that happened in 1953. Also in 1953 is like the height of the Cold War, okay, with nuclear. And Forrest Fenn does a lot of talk about that when he was stationed in Germany. Well, the Soviet Union did their second series of nuclear weapon tests, 1953. The USA did Operation Upshot Knothole nuclear weapon testing also in 1953. The Korean War ended in 1953, essentially. The United States Air Force and the U.S. Navy assisted the French in the Indochina War in 1953. Ernest Hemingway won his first Pulitzer Prize in May of 1953. F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, by one of his heirs, renewed the copyright for the second time and re-released The Great Gatsby in 1953. J.D. Salinger, this is the most interesting one, because remember, Forrest Fenn threw away these books, but he liked J.D. Salinger. Well, J.D. Salinger published a book of 9 short stories. So we have 9 clues. J.D. Salinger, 9 stories, was published in 1953. Kismet, the musical version of it, was produced in Broadway in 1953. Then The Boys and Dam, Entrance to the Wind River Canyon, was finished in 1953. This stuff down here I have doesn't really pertain to 1953, but I'm trying to let you know that locally Cody is known as Cody Yellowstone. That's a fact. The other thing is I want to point out the surveillance system at the wheel, which is still active today, was actually used during the nuclear testing that they were talking about and after. Now remember, Forrest Fenn was a radio operator. So that tower up by the medicine wheel on Medicine Mountain was in use in 1963 with radar that would detect basically somebody coming here to send a bomb, the United States. And they did an awful lot of testing in the Bighorn Basin. You can easily find that out if you research it. So that's why I had notes about that down here. So anyway, a lot of things happened in 1953. And this is the Boyson Reservoir. Okay. Now, as you know, reservoirs collect runoff from the mountains and hold it so that during the dry time of the year, they can draw from the reservoir to supply water to the local areas. Okay, so you can essentially say that a reservoir is drawing water, pulling water towards itself. That's what reservoirs do. So we have wedding of the waters. Wedding of the waters is the Wind River comes in through the Boyson Reservoir into the Wind River Canyon, and right here in midstream, it changes names from the Wind River to the Bighorn River, and then of course it continues down. So essentially, the Bighorn River comes to life here. So, like I said in the other video, the next part of the poem says, "And take it in the canyon down, not far, but too far to walk." Well, he says not far, which means it's near, but it's not near enough that you can walk to it. So that rules out Wind River Canyon in this psalm. So you're going to take it, so it would be the Bighorn River at that point that just started into the canyon down. Now he says the canyon, which is different than a canyon. A canyon means any canyon, but the canyon is a specific canyon. So it would make sense that when he says the canyon, since we're on the Bighorn River, the canyon would be the Bighorn Canyon, right? Because when you follow the river down, okay, the first canyon you're going to cross over is right here, Sheep Canyon. Okay, but that's like a minor canyon. But once you pass that canyon, okay, the next canyon is up here on the border to Montana. That's the Bighorn Canyon. The point is, and as you see the solstice line coming off the wheel, right? And again, this isn't about try to wheel, but like I said, that would be one of the hints. As I've said in the past, if you read stanza 2, you don't go in the canyon down. The water takes it in the canyon down. Okay, it's pretty clear the way he wrote that English. So if you're going down the canyon when he's telling you in that line, you shouldn't be doing that because that's not what the poem is telling you to do. He's not telling you to take it in the canyon down. The warm waters is the subject of that part of the sentence, not you. The only thing he's telling you to do is begin it. Okay. And he's telling you to begin it where warm waters halt. Okay. So it's begin it where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, not far, but far to walk. So the whole part after the word where warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down, not far, but far to walk, is one subordinating clause that's telling you where to begin it. That whole block is where to begin it. It's describing something, right? He's not telling you what to do other than begin it. So if you listen to that, when you come down, okay, the next part he's telling you to put in below the Homer Brown. So for water theme, the put in would be where you exit the water, right? So the Homer Brown, and I'm not going to make this an entire solve video, but the Homer Brown is Medicine Mountain, essentially. So you're below it in elevation. You're down here at 5,000 feet, and Medicine Mountain is at 10,000 feet. So you're putting in below it, but you're going to do it somewhere before the canyon, which is the Bighorn Canyon. And then he describes that area in the next part. He says where not to go initially. He says, from there, it is no place for the meek. Okay. Now, it is still referring to that canyon that we're not supposed to go in. So, as I said, no place for the meek is Devil's Playground and Devil's Canyon. He's saying from there, so imagine we're standing at the Five Springs River. From there, it is no place for the meek. And then he says the end is ever drawing nigh. Well, look what we got going on here. This is a reservoir. Remember, I said reservoirs are drawing. Here's the Buffalo Bill Cody Reservoir, okay, which is the another river coming down here that terminates. So this is ever drawing nigh. This is ever drawing nigh. And then we go down here where we started. There's another reservoir. That's ever drawing nigh, right? So when we're standing here, every direction has something that's drawing. It's all reservoirs. Not only does that have it, but this is the only creek that has two reservoirs, not one, but two Five Springs reservoirs. So this is drawing nigh. So every single thing from this point is drawing nigh. So he says the place is no place for the meek, like I said, would be Devil's Canyon and Devil's Playground. The end is ever drawing nigh. I just described that to you, right? Then he says what's going to be in your future. There will be no paddle up your creek. Okay. Just heavy loads and water high. So heavy loads. Now, this is the part that I didn't tell Sam because I didn't know it. I didn't have Five Springs figured out at the time. But heavy loads and water high is describing the trail that you would take from here to go to the place that you would marvel gaze. And, Tarry Scanton Marble Gaze, which is a campsite that's close to a place that people would go to observe a wonder. And these are historical sites, right? So water high would be the waterfall. That's where he's taking you here. So now when you're coming up here, even if you came out up here where it's truly drawing nigh, instead of right here at the mouth of the creek, you're putting in, okay, and actually there is a put in right here under the road. You would follow this road in. Now he says, if you've been wise and found the blaze, we have the sun coming down. So you're following the sun up there. That's the initial blaze. Now, this is where I'm saying that the history of the wheel doesn't really even come into play with this psalm, because all you would need to know is that the medicine wheel represents the solstice, right? So you know that the sunrise is going to come down. They have a map that shows it on site. So you're going to find the blaze. Where are you going to find it? The first place you're going to find it is right here where you're supposed to turn off. Okay. If you were to keep going this way, you end up at the wheel. If you go this way, you end up at the campground. Okay. And then, of course, when you go up and you know the rest of the poem, you can see my solve of how it works out here. But I didn't discuss that part with Sam because I didn't have it figured out yet. So you can do this without figuring out trying to wheel, although I believe it'll be very hard to do so. So I think that's part of the solve. I still believe my original solve, but I just wanted to put this out there to show you guys because I know a lot of people were using Wedding of the Waters as their where warm water salt. But how many of them actually thought about the fact that this is where the Bighorn River is born? And notice that we're on a border here. This is the border of the Wind River Reservation. And if you go all the way up the river, when it enters the canyon, this is the Crow Reservation. So we're on another border here. We're sandwiched between the two major players when it comes to the medicine wheel. Okay. And obviously that plays a big part of it. So the other video I came out with the hints, like I said, for the can opener, all of that stuff. Some of those hints are kind of hard to interpret. I mean, that's what leads to rabbit holes, right? But some of them, in my opinion, are also very easy. For example, tying it to level is easy. Everybody, well, not everybody, but pretty much the majority of people agree that when Forrest was discussing that in The Thrill of the Chase, he's talking about Apollo 8 and Apollo 13. And he's talking about that movie and Tom Hanks. Well, the astronaut that was involved that covered the Earth with his thumb when he was coming from behind the dark side of the moon, his last name was Lovell. He was the commander, right? And then the second time they went up there, that was supposed to be the first time they landed on the moon, but they couldn't. And the reason why they couldn't land is because their oxygen system failed. It caught on fire. So when Forrest Fenn's talking about, I always look down at my blinking oxygen light, I mean, that's clearly everybody pretty much agrees is a reference to Apollo 8 and Apollo 13. Well, that leads you to level. Now, the astronaut level has nothing to do with this level, but to me, that's a pretty easy hint to connect. Some of them are a little bit more difficult, like teachers with ropes. Well, that would be the ropes that are around the wheel and the reason why you go to the wheel. Okay. To teach, to speak with the spirits, to learn, to gain knowledge, wisdom, right? And then when you look at the gypsies that were at the camp in a circle dancing, well, what do you think happens at a Sundance? But those are a little bit more subjective. Okay, you can't objectively say that, and that's the problem with the hints, right? You can't. They're not they're all subjective, all of them. The only one I can think of that's not subjective, like I said, is level. So anyway, that's that. That's really all I wanted to say in this video. I just wanted to briefly show you how that would work. Like I said, my original solve video is still what I'm going by. I believe that that's ultimately the way it works. But if you did not find the secret in there, it would make sense that Forrest Fenn would have it work another way. So this way is a little bit less confirming, but everything totally makes sense. I mean, like I said, I know tons of people that use Wedding of the Waters, and some of them stayed in that area, some of them went down, okay, downstream, and a lot of them did what Sam did and went around and came up Porcupine Falls. But I don't want to get into that part again. So, but anyway, I just want to put this out there. And the other thing I wanted to follow up with, and this is all totally opinion. Obviously, we think that one person found the jar over near West Yellowstone at Baker's Hole. I don't believe that it was ever proven, but it made me think, well, what are other likely places that he hid a jar? So I just want to give you guys a couple of my opinions, and I'm not going to give any analysis or anything. They're just my opinion in case any of you want to look for jars. Um, the first place I have written down is the hole in the wall. And I'm not talking about where the cabins were. I'm talking about the actual hole in the wall up on the mountain where they hid out, which is right here. Um, to get here, I believe you have to go through private property, so be careful. I don't think the hole in the wall itself is on private property, but I believe you have to cross through private property to get there. But I believe he could have hid one there. I believe he could have hid a jar over at Hell's Half Acre. Okay. I believe he might have hit a jar where warm water salt. In this case, that would be over here. Okay. Wedding of the Waters. You might have hit a jar somewhere around there. I believe that he might have hit a jar up where the dot is on the map by Heart Mountain, somewhere, or somewhere, anywhere near Cody. I believe he would have had one. I believe in West Yellowstone, Montana, and this is the one I think was found. Where's West Yellowstone? So right around here, where Baker's Hole is, right on the edge of Yellowstone, not in Yellowstone, but somewhere over here. I believe it could be. Yeah, I believe he hid one on his property in Santa Fe. He buried one on his property, and obviously the homeowner who buys it is never going to know that. But I don't think the chest was there, but I believe he probably hid a jar there. It makes sense. Um, I believe he might have also hid one at his home in Temple, Texas. Okay. Now, if you were to look in Yellowstone, I remember Forrest Fenn said he dug holes and buried them deeper than metal detectors. So if he did this in Yellowstone, it would be illegal. But for those of you that think that he might have done something illegal, the first place I would go is Grebe Lake, hands down. That's where he took Coach Chauncey when he was dying, and where he took his dad when he was dying, hands down. Place number 2, Fishing Bridge. Okay, that's where they spent the family spent their first 2 years in tents, basically, over here, not in West Yellowstone. They spent it here. It was like 6, 7 years later, almost in the 40s, by the time they went over to West Yellowstone. So I believe he might have hid one here. And the other one, I believe, where he might have hid it is somewhere along this stretch of the Yellowstone. This is all areas where people fish. Okay, especially over here, I believe it's prime trout area. Especially back in the day, you look at how crowded it was on Fishing Bridge. Well, Forrest Fenn learned to fish from his father, and I believe he learned how to fish right here. Okay, so it would make sense that he hit a jar somewhere around here. Those are the places I would look. Basically, anywhere along this blue line that I have from Kerwin is where I would look. Yeah, that's what it's called, Lee Hardy Rapids. No place for the meek. I believe he right here is the fishing area. So this is where that trip that he took in Vietnam would go if he took it in Yellowstone. It would take you right over the area where everything is. Skippy's picture, which is Skippy's Rock, I call it, Canyon Village, flies right over that. Here's Grebe Lake, okay, where he bought Coach Chauncey and his dad when they were dying. And then Arrowhead Canyon, Horseshoe Hill. And of course, you kept going, you would end up in Obsidian Creek or the Gardner River. But it stops here because that is what would be where he went in approximately. I didn't do it exact on purpose, but that would be where he went in Vietnam at a special place. It makes sense to me that somehow, I don't know whether it was before the war or after the war, when he came to the realization that essentially, if he was shot down in the United States, he'd be shot down somewhere up in Montana, probably by Butte. Okay. He would have been shot down by Butte, Montana, and parachuted out. And his special place would have been right here. So up here, not down at 9 Mile Hole, up here. This is the exact vector copied from what he told me was right in Vietnam over here. So I know that's right. So that's why if I were looking in Yellowstone, anybody that's looking anywhere along this line, you could pretty much get all the clues to fit. And it certainly makes a lot of sense because, especially here, I mean, this is water high. This is the largest waterfall here. The other places that you could say will be water high would be down on the geyser basins, are up at the Norris Basin. Okay, there's no water high or anything down here, and a single boulder is not heavy load. So, I mean, if I were looking, I'd be looking somewhere around here, but I'm not. I still believe that it was in the Bighorns, and I'm not going to change my mind about that. So, there's no point. I don't believe we're ever going to know the real solve. You know, I hope we do. I hope that Shiloh or Jack decides to come out and give it at some point. It'd be nice to know. At least I know that I'm in the right state. It was in Wyoming. There's no doubt about that. If you don't believe it was in Wyoming, you're going to have a really hard case to prove. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm just saying it's going to be difficult. You know, so I'm happy knowing that I was in Wyoming. But how close was I? I'd really like to know that. I believe I was extremely close. But we'll see. Hopefully one day. So that's all I wanted to show you guys. I hope you have a good weekend. And unless some news comes out, I don't know if I'm going to do any more videos for the rest of this year. For the next 2 weeks, there's really nothing much to talk about. Um, I wanted to do a video and go over Thrill of the Chase and give you all the hints that are up here, but I decided not to do it. I can maybe mention some of them, but the primary reason why I don't want to do it is because, like I said, hints are very subjective. And it was important to me that when I told you my solution, that it didn't involve any hints. So, if you have to come out with a solution that can't stand on its own with just the poem and the map that is available wherever you think the chest was, I think your solution is probably wrong. It shouldn't rely on anything, any knowledge from any of Forrest Fenn's books other than the Thrill of the Chase. And if it's specifically named in the Thrill of the Chase as the location, to me that rules it out because he said that the hints are subtle. So if he names a place, he doesn't mention Grebe Lake, incidentally, in the Thrill of the Chase, but he does in Too Far to Walk. So to me, that would rule out Grebe Lake. And he mentions all the other places: 9 Mile Hole, 7 Mile Bridge, Baker's Hole, uh, you know, places in Montana, Fishing Bridge. All those are directly named in Thrill of the Chase. So, in my opinion, that's not subtle. It rules it out. So I don't believe the chest was anywhere at all within the bounds. I could be wrong about that, but talk to y'all later. Peace.